The freezing rain hammered down like bullets as 15-year-old Kai Harlan dropped hard to his knees in the mud behind Evergreen Academy. "Give it back!" His scream tore through the storm, the first time the silent ghost of the school had ever raised his voice all year. Bryce Caldwell laughed like a devil and hurled a silver lighter high into the air. The sacred 1951 winged serpent lighter, his grandfather's most treasured relic, flashed once in the lightning, then vanished forever into the black ravine below. Kai's world shattered. He was the invisible boy, the scrawny kid in old flannel who never spoke, who never fought back. But Bryce had just made a fatal mistake. He had awakened something ancient, something deadly. Evergreen Academy High School stood like a gleaming fortress of privilege in the heart of wealthy Pinecrest Valley, Oregon. This was a world where power was measured in the growl of luxury cars gifted on 16th birthdays and the sparkle of limited edition sneakers under the crisp autumn sun. Money talked, status ruled, and weakness was hunted without mercy. Kai Harlan was the ghost who refused to be seen. 15 years old, painfully thin, he drifted through the polished hallways like smoke, faded grey flannel hanging off narrow shoulders, combat boots scuffed from years of silent service. No smartphone glowing in his pocket, no designer labels, just silence. Deep, impenetrable silence. He didn't join clubs, he didn't play sports, he didn't speak unless absolutely necessary. Most days the other students walked right past him as if he didn't exist. But Kai wasn't weak. He had been forged in silence and steel. His grandfather had taught him well. Words were for fools. Real power waited. Reactions were only for when death came knocking. So he endured. He observed. He survived. Then came Bryce Caldwell. Bryce was everything Kai was not. Football captain, star athlete, son of Richard Caldwell, the ruthless real estate kingpin who owned half the valley. Tall, muscular, with a jaw carved from marble and eyes that demanded worship. He didn't just lead the school, he terrorized it. Flanked by his two loyal enforcers, Mason and Derek, Bryce craved one thing above all: fear. Raw, paralyzing fear. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday during lunch. The cafeteria buzzed with hundreds of voices, trays clattering, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Kai moved like a shadow through the chaos, tray balanced carefully in his hands, eyes fixed on the floor. He wanted nothing more than to disappear. He never saw the shoulder coming. Bryce slammed into him with brutal force. The impact was like being hit by a truck. Kai's tray exploded upward in a violent arc. Plates shattered against the tiles with deafening crashes. Thick, steaming sauce sprayed across the walls and floor like arterial blood. The metallic clang of the tray hitting the ground ripped through the room like a gunshot. Everything stopped. The entire cafeteria fell into a suffocating silence. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died. Every eye in the room locked onto the scene. Kai stood motionless for a long second, staring down at the destruction at his feet. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, he raised his head. His eyes found Bryce's. They weren't the eyes of a frightened boy. They were ice. Empty. Deadly calm. The kind of stare that cut straight into your soul and made you question every sin you'd ever committed. A predator measuring whether you were worth killing. Bryce felt the chill race down his spine. For the first time in his life, the king felt truly small. His stomach twisted. Cold sweat prickled his skin. "The fuck you staring at, you little ghost?" Bryce snarled, voice cracking with forced bravado. His friends laughed too loudly, trying to fill the terrifying quiet. Kai didn't speak. He didn't flinch. He simply stared. Bryce cursed viciously, shoving past him and storming out, Mason and Derek trailing behind like nervous dogs. But the damage was done. From that moment, Kai Harlan became public enemy number one. The bullying escalated with terrifying speed. Shoulder checks in the hallway became daily rituals, each one harder, more vicious. Cruel whispers followed him everywhere. Freak. Nobody. Why don't you just disappear? In the locker room after gym class, his clothes were ripped from his locker and hurled into the scalding showers, emerging soaked and ruined. Threatening notes appeared on his locker in thick black marker. "You're next. Watch your back, ghost boy." Every single day, Kai clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. He stared at the floor tiles until they blurred. He remembered his grandfather's voice, low and iron hard. "Never strike first, boy. Never bring that trouble home." But every time Bryce and his crew laughed, savage, triumphant laughter, Kai felt himself sinking deeper into an endless black pit of loneliness and shame. The cold isolation wrapped tighter around his chest, crushing the air from his lungs. He was drowning in silence. Yet deep beneath the crushing weight of humiliation, buried in the darkest corners of his soul, something ancient and terrifying began to stir. A dragon. Sleeping. Waiting. For the moment it would be forced to wake up and burn the entire world to ash. November rain hammered down like the wrath of an angry god, turning the world behind Evergreen Academy into a freezing, muddy hellscape. Sheets of ice-cold water lashed sideways, soaking everything in sight. Kai Harlan huddled on the stone bench behind the gymnasium, arms wrapped desperately around his shivering frame, trying to hold himself together against the bone-deep cold. 3 brutal miles of dark, winding road still separated him from home. No bus, no ride, no one who gave a damn. He could only wait, teeth chattering, body trembling violently. In his raw, trembling hands rested the single most precious thing in his shattered existence, the antique silver lighter from 1951. Its surface was worn smooth by decades of silent wars, the fierce winged serpent head engraved deep into the metal, wings spread like it was ready to strike even now. This was no ordinary lighter. It was sacred. A forbidden relic his grandfather had smuggled out of the old workshop years ago, a piece of living history that carried the weight of blood, brotherhood, and unbreakable oaths. Kai had only borrowed it for one stolen moment, just to feel its cold, solid weight, to trace every etched line with his thumb, to remind himself that somewhere in this cruel world, he still belonged to something stronger than silence. The sound of heavy boots splashing through puddles sliced through the roar of the storm. 3 shadows emerged from the grey curtain of rain like demons rising from the abyss. Bryce Caldwell stood at the center, rain streaming off his perfect jawline, flanked by Mason and Derek. His eyes locked instantly onto the silver glint in Kai's hands. A savage, predatory grin split his face. "Playing with fire, ghost boy?" Bryce snarled, voice dripping with venom. Before Kai could even breathe, Bryce lunged forward and ripped the lighter clean out of his grip. Kai exploded off the bench. The metal legs screeched against the wet concrete like a dying animal. For the first time in the entire school year, his unbreakable mask of silence and emptiness completely shattered. His heart slammed against his ribs like war drums in a battlefield. "Give it back!" The scream tore out of him, raw, hoarse, cracked wide open with pure panic. Bryce threw his head back and laughed, loud and cruel, tossing the lighter back and forth between himself and his friends like it was nothing more than a cheap toy. He read the inscription and sneered with pure disgust. 1951? What the hell is this piece of garbage? Some worthless junk from a bum on the street. Kai stepped forward, fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned bone white. Rain poured down his face in freezing rivers, mixing with the hot sting of rising tears. "Don't mess with it, Bryce," he begged, voice trembling violently. "That's my grandfather's. He'd kill me if it's lost. Please, just give it back." Bryce's eyes gleamed with sadistic triumph. He stepped closer, towering over the smaller, soaked boy. "Get on your knees." When Kai hesitated even a heartbeat, Bryce shoved him hard. Kai crashed down. Both knees slammed into the freezing mud and concrete with brutal force. Pain exploded through his legs like lightning. The icy rain whipped across his face like lashes from a whip. Time slowed to a crushing, agonizing crawl. A devastating flashback hit Kai like a freight train. His grandfather's deep, iron-hard voice teaching him, "Silence is the strongest weapon you have, boy. Never let them see you break." But the shame was too much. It burned hotter than fire, hotter than anything. Kai's voice broke completely. "Please," he whispered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the relentless rain. "I'm begging you, Bryce. Please." Bryce looked down at him with pure, mocking contempt. "You know what? This cheap shit actually belongs right here in the mud." With a powerful, theatrical throw, Bryce hurled the silver lighter high into the air. It spun in slow motion through the pouring rain, a tiny, gleaming arc of silver against the grey apocalypse, before sailing over the chain-link fence and disappearing forever into the black, pawn-choked ravine below. Kai's entire world shattered. He stayed frozen on his knees in the freezing mud, watching in soul-crushing horror as the darkness swallowed the last living piece of his grandfather. His hands tore open later as he clawed desperately through razor-sharp pawns along the ravine's edge, blood mixing with rain and mud. But it was gone. Everything was gone. Bryce and his two loyal dogs burst into loud, triumphant laughter. They high-fived each other, slapped backs, and strolled away into the storm without a single backward glance, their cruel echoes fading into the downpour. They had no idea of what they had just done. They had not just stolen and destroyed a simple lighter. They had just thrown away a sacred relic belonging to a founding member of the Shadow Reapers MC. And in doing so, they had unknowingly signed their own death warrants with blood. Kai remained kneeling in the freezing mud long after they vanished, body convulsing with cold, pain, and absolute, soul-crushing despair. The dragon deep inside his chest stirred for the first time, one deadly golden eye cracking open in the darkness. And it was hungry. Kai Harlan dragged himself through the storm like a broken soldier returning from a war he never asked to fight. Rain lashed his face, mixing with blood from the thorns that had shredded his hands raw. Every breath burned. Every step sent fresh agony screaming up his legs from knees still bruised and bleeding from the concrete. 3 agonizing miles later, the massive iron gates of the Harlan property finally loomed out of the darkness, a sprawling compound on the edge of Pinecrest Valley, where steel and secrets had ruled for decades. The 2 massive Rottweilers guarding the yard didn't bark. They knew him. They simply watched with silent, knowing eyes as the soaked, shattered boy slipped inside. The workshop was alive with the low hum of neon lights and the heavy scent of oil, metal, and old leather. Victor Viper Harlan stood at the center of it all. 74 years old, built like a fortress wall that time had only hardened. Snow-white hair tied back in a warrior's tail, arms covered in faded war tattoos that told stories most men would die before hearing. He was wiping grease from his massive hands when Kai staggered in, dripping mud and despair onto the concrete floor. One look. That was all it took. Viper's steel-blue eyes swept over his grandson, the purple bruises blooming across Kai's cheek, the torn knees, the bloodied pans, the hollow, defeated stare. And the old man knew everything without a single word being spoken. He crossed the workshop in 3 thunderous strides, his heavy boots echoing like Judgment Day. One calloused hand gripped Kai's chin, tilting the boy's face up into the harsh neon blow. The touch was firm, but not cruel. It was the grip of a man who had buried brothers and stared death in the eye more times than he could count. "Where's my 1951 lighter, boy?" Viper's voice rolled out low and gravel-deep, like distant thunder rolling across the mountains. Kai's knees buckled. The dam inside him exploded. He collapsed forward, sobbing violently, the words pouring out in a broken flood between gasping breaths. I only took it to look at it, Grandpa. Just for a second. Bryce, he saw it. He ripped it out of my hands. I begged him. I got on my knees in the mud and begged him. But he laughed and threw it into the ravine. It's gone. It's all gone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Viper didn't roar. He didn't slam his fist into the workbench. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was far more terrifying. The old man's eyes, once the color of faded denim, turned to glacial ice in a heartbeat. A flashback tore through his mind like lightning. Blood-soaked nights on the highways of the West Coast, the roar of 100 Harley engines, the winged serpent patch burning on his chest as he and his brothers carved fear into the bones of anyone who dared cross the Shadow Reapers. He had built that empire from nothing in 1949. He had walked through hell wearing it like armor, and he had chosen to bury it all so his only grandson could live a normal life. Now that choice had nearly destroyed the last blood he had left in this world. Viper's jaw tightened until the tendons stood out like steel cables. His massive fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. But his voice remained deathly calm. "You fight back yet?" Kai shook his head, tears still streaming. "No. I didn't want the cops coming here. I didn't want to bring any of this down on you." A heavy, soul-weary sigh escaped the old warlord's chest. The sound of an entire underground empire stirring awake after decades of sleep. He placed one huge hand on Kai's shoulder, the warmth cutting through the boy's freezing clothes like the first ray of sunlight after eternal night. "Go inside. Shower. Get warm. Put medicine on those cuts. Now." Kai nodded numbly and stumbled toward the house, leaving wet footprints and shattered pride behind him. Viper stood motionless for a long moment after the door clicked shut. Then he turned and walked into the small, dimly lit office at the back of the workshop. The heavy steel door slammed behind him with final, brutal finality. No shouting, no breaking glass. Just the thick, suffocating silence of a man who had once been death itself, deciding whether the world still remembered his name. He sat down slowly behind the old wooden desk, the leather chair creaking under his weight. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and ancient it had to be chained down with iron will. The image of his grandson on his knees in the mud, begging a rich little punk who had never known real pain, burned behind Viper's eyes like a branding iron. The dragon had opened both eyes now, and it was no longer sleeping. It was rising. Inside the heavy, oil-soaked office at the back of the workshop, the air tasted of rust, leather, and pure, controlled fury. Victor Viper Harlan did not explode. He did not roar. He did not slam his fists into the scarred wooden desk like a lesser man would have. Instead, the 74-year-old warlord became colder than the November rain still hammering the metal roof above him. He lowered himself into the old leather chair with deliberate calm, the same deadly precision he had once used to bury bodies and build empires. His massive, tattooed hand reached for the ancient rotary phone that hadn't rung in decades. Every click of the dial sounded like the cocking of a hammer. First call. "It's Viper," he growled, voice low and gravel thick, carrying the weight of 50 years of blood and iron. "Calling in the 1998 favor with Jax in Ironport. And get word to the Sacramento chapter. Viper's got a deep pest problem right here in Pinecrest Valley. Show the colors. No blood. Yet." He listened for a heartbeat, then his eyes narrowed into slits of glacial blue. When the voice on the other end asked how many men he needed, Viper slowly rose from the chair. He walked to the small, grimy window and stared out toward the glittering lights of the rich Pinecrest estates, the same world that had forced his only grandson to kneel in freezing mud like a dog. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper that somehow thundered louder than any scream. "All of them." The line went dead. The next morning, gray Oregon light struggled to pierce the clouds as Viper stepped out onto the porch wearing his Shadow Reaper's cut like it had never been retired. The black leather vest hugged his barrel chest perfectly, the fierce winged serpent patch on his back gleaming with deadly promise. He poured himself a mug of pitch-black coffee and sat on the wooden steps like an ancient king surveying the battlefield before the charge. Kai appeared in the doorway, pale, bruised, and trembling with fear. "You're still going to school today," Viper said without turning around, voice flat as forged steel. Kai's stomach knotted. "Grandpa, please, let me stay home. I can't face them again, not after—" Viper finally turned. His steel-blue eyes locked onto his grandson with unyielding force, the kind of stare that had once made entire rival crews back down without a single shot fired. "A man does not hide in the house because some spoiled little coward threw him in the mud. You will go to school, you will do your work. And at exactly 11:45, you will stand by the flagpole in front of the entire school. You do not run, you do not hide. You stand there like the blood that runs in your veins demands it." The heavy coffee mug hit the wooden step with a sharp, final clack, the sound cracking through the morning air like the first gunshot of war. Kai's legs felt like lead, but he knew better than to argue. He nodded once, grabbed his faded flannel jacket, and walked toward the bus stop like a soldier marching to his execution. Meanwhile, inside the buzzing cafeteria of Evergreen Academy, Bryce Caldwell was holding court at the center table, laughing like a king who had just conquered the world. You should have seen that pathetic little ghost on his knees in the pouring rain, crying like a bitch, Bryce boasted, voice loud enough for half the room to hear. He mimicked Kai's broken plea in a high, mocking whine. "Please, Bryce, please. I threw that piece of junk into the ravine like the trash it was. You never forget who runs this school." His friends exploded into savage laughter, slapping the tables, cheering their hero. None of them noticed the distant, low rumble beginning to build on the horizon. A sound like distant thunder that would soon become the end of everything they knew. Back at the workshop, Viper stood motionless among the silent machines and cold steel, staring out across the valley. In his mind, he could already hear it, the deep, guttural roar of hundreds of V-twin Harley engines waking up across Oregon and beyond. The thunder of an armada of black and chrome rolling toward Pinecrest Valley like the wrath of God wearing leather and scars. The Shadow Reapers were coming. Not a handful of riders, not a warning. An entire underground empire he had helped forge in blood and fire in 1949 was awakening from decades of silence. The dragon had fully spread its wings. And it was no longer just hungry. It was coming to burn the world. The clock hit 11:45 exactly, and the sky over Evergreen Academy split wide open. A low, bone-rattling thunder rolled across the hills, not from storm clouds, but from the earth itself tearing apart. Hundreds of massive V-twin engines roared to life in perfect, terrifying unison, the sound crashing through the classrooms like the wrath of God riding iron horses. The ground shook so hard windows rattled in their frames. Students froze mid-sentence, forks dropped from shaking hands, and every head turned toward the parking lot. They came like a black tidal wave of pure, unstoppable vengeance. Over 200 shadow reapers from every chapter across the West Coast thundered through the gates. An armada of chrome and leather swallowed the entire lot, completely burying the sea of luxury cars and designer SUVs. Engines growled and died one by one until an eerie, heavy silence blanketed the campus. Row after row of scarred, battle-hardened riders stood motionless in perfect formation, the fierce winged serpent patches on their cuts gleaming like warnings from hell itself. Police cruisers screamed onto the scene, lights flashing, but the moment the officers saw the sheer scale of the leather army, they simply parked at a safe distance and watched. No one was stupid enough to start a war they could never win. Victor Viper Harlan rolled in at the head of the column on his matte black road glide, the undisputed king of the pack. The 74-year-old warlord killed the engine with a final, earth-shaking thump, swung off the bike like a man half his age, and marched straight to the main entrance. He rapped his massive, ring-covered fist on the glass door twice, sharp as gunshots. The principal opened it with trembling hands, face drained of all color. Viper stepped inside like he owned the blood in the walls. His heavy boots echoed down the hallway like Judgment Day itself. He found Kai standing exactly where ordered, alone by the flagpole, small, silent, and unbreakable in his faded flannel. The old man placed one large, warm hand on his grandson's narrow shoulder. His voice was low, gravel-deep, and thick with pride that could have leveled mountains. "You did good, grandson," he said. "Real good." But then the dragon spoke his final command. "Bring me Bryce Caldwell, and get his father here, right now." Richard Harrington, the ruthless real estate tycoon who owned half the valley, arrived 20 minutes later. The second he stepped out of his gleaming SUV and saw the ocean of outlaw bikers surrounding his son's school, every drop of blood drained from his face. He looked like a man staring into the mouth of his own grave. Viper didn't shout. He didn't threaten with fists. He simply looked Richard dead in the eyes and spoke with the calm, lethal authority of a man who could end empires with nothing but a phone call. "I still control every concrete and steel union on your current projects, Harrington. One call from me and your son loses everything. One more call and your entire billion-dollar empire rots into bankruptcy. You understand me?" Richard Harrington understood perfectly. He turned to his son, the once untouchable football king who was now trembling like a frightened child, and his voice cracked with fear. "Get down there and find the damn lighter." What happened next was 4 hours of pure, poetic, soul-shattering justice. Bryce Caldwell, the boy who had forced Kai to kneel in the freezing mud, was now crawling on his hands and knees through the exact same thorn-choked ravine. The same merciless rain lashed his face. His designer clothes were shredded to rags. His manicured hands tore open on razor-sharp branches, blood mixing with black mud as he clawed desperately through the freezing darkness. Every cut, every bruise, every broken sob was watched in stunned silence by the entire school, faces pressed against the windows like witnesses to an execution. At 3:45 p.m., a weak, broken cry rose from the ravine. Bryce crawled out at the top, unrecognizable. Covered head to toe in thick, black mud, face swollen from cold and tears, body shaking violently. In his filthy, bleeding palms, he held the silver 1951 lighter like it was the last piece of his soul. Viper took it slowly, He wiped it clean with a black bandana, then flicked it open. Kick. A bright, steady orange flame burst to life, dancing defiantly against the wind. The old warlord stared straight into Richard Harrington's terrified eyes and spoke words that would echo through Pinecrest Valley forever. "Teach your boy some respect. Next time I come for something, I won't be asking nicely for it back." Viper turned, placed his strong, protective arm around Kai's shoulders, and the two of them walked out together. The silent grandson and the dragon who guarded him through the parting sea of leather and steel. As they reached the bikes, every single engine roared to life at once. The sound was deafening, earth-shattering, like the very ground was splitting open in triumph. The massive convoy of Shadow Reapers formed a thunderous escort around Viper's road glide, and they rode out of Evergreen Academy in a roaring, unstoppable procession that shook the foundations of the entire valley. Kai Harlan was never bullied again. He still wore the same old flannel shirt. He still walked the halls in that same unbreakable silence. But now, every single student moved out of his way the instant they saw him coming. The hallways parted like the Red Sea before a ghost who was no longer invisible. Because they had all learned the hardest, most terrifying lesson of their lives. Never, ever touch the quiet ones. Because behind the silence of the smallest boy in school, there might be an entire army of shadows, an empire of steel and fire, ready to burn the whole world down just to protect him. The boy who once knelt in the mud had finally risen, and the dragon was watching.